Hey, did you know that over 90% of our viewers watch our videos but haven't subscribed yet? If you enjoy these true trucker horror stories, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It's free and really motivates us to keep the stories rolling. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into today's stories. Welcome to the Sleep Haunt. Tonight, we bring you 7 true, most disturbing trucker horror stories, real encounters from endless highways, dark fuel stops, and nights when something in the rearview mirror just wouldn't fade away. Before we begin, we've set a goal. Let's reach 100 likes on this video. Tap that like button now and help us keep the wheels turning through the dark. Now, settle in, breathe slow, and listen. The road remembers everything. Story number 1. Caleb ran nights because nights were kinder. Daytime meant merge lanes and brake lights, way stations and chatter. Night meant long straightaways where the landscape flattened and the truck's hum folded over itself into something almost soothing. He liked the red glow of the instrument panel and the way the world narrowed to the soft cone of his headlights and the square glow of his side mirrors. He was the kind of driver who learned the moods of highways the way others learn the moods of people. On a wind-polished stretch of state road cutting across the prairie, his GPS announced a rest area he'd never noticed. Gray Ridge Overlook. It called itself in tidy letters and a green icon. The name suggested trees and picnic tables. The prairie offered neither. The sky was a lid. The stars were muted, as if dust hung just below them. Caleb's fuel was fine, and his eyes felt steady, but the name hooked into him. An overlook on a flat land? He'd take a stretch and a coffee. The signs appeared like they had been planted for him only that hour. Service 1 mile. Then, rest area 1/2 mile. Then, smaller and lit from a crooked angle, a yellow folding sign said closed, though the lights beyond it burned white and welcoming. He slowed anyway, checked his mirrors the way a habit checks itself, and turned down the ramp. The ramp ran longer than it should have. 1/2 mile became more. The curve was gentle and felt almost level, like a carousel that had forgotten how to stop. Grass whipped by in a blur. The radio lost its only station. The engine sound found a new drone, one he didn't know how to place, as if the wheels were on finely sanded wood and not asphalt. At last, the ramp let him out into a wide parking area. Fresh paint marked slots that were all empty. The building was low and square, its brick too clean, its windows glossy. A single maintenance cart sat near the door, orange beacon dark, a ring of keys on a hook that caught the light just enough to be noticed. He set the parking brake and let the engine idle, not ready to hear silence. The closed sign at the door leaned drunk against a bollard, and someone had pushed it aside with a shoe. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of cleanser and old rain. The vending machines were newer than any he'd seen on the route, brushed metal with bright screens. They displayed options that made his throat feel suddenly dry. Coffee, tea, water, sandwiches with smiling labels. He reached for his wallet. And as he did, the machine made a little sound, a coin drop, as if someone behind the building had just fed it. No one stood there, but the coffee option flickered, correcting itself from dark roast to road roast. A tiny joke that made his mouth go a little cold. A map of the region on the wall spread out in pastel colors. Gray Ridge Overlook was a neat dot with a star beside it. When he looked for the "You Are Here" sticker, he found only a peeled oval and a smudge the size of a fingertip. Behind glass, there was a display of historical photos, a hill that didn't exist here, a ridge with a railing and people in windbreakers looking down into a valley that looked like an ocean carved from grass. He washed his hands just to hear the water. The sound was too generous, echoing through the tiled room like it belonged in a much larger space. The paper towel dispenser coughed as if clearing its throat, and the motion sensor light in the adjoining hallway clicked on and off in a lazy rhythm, triggered by nothing he could see. He bought a coffee anyway. The paper cup was blank white with a single raised ring around the middle, as if made to be held by tired fingers in the cold. The liquid steamed gently. It tasted like nothing at first, then like a memory of coffee, then like coffee again. He carried it back outside to the tail of his trailer, watching his breath mix with the steam and disappear. Wind nudged the exit sign and set it to a slow pendulum. High above, where the highway should be, he heard the long rushing sound of a car passing. Another. But the whole time he had driven down the ramp, no taillights had crested the curve ahead of him, and now none showed going by. He decided he didn't like leaving the engine idling. He killed it, and the truck twitched into stillness. For a few seconds, the quiet held. Then the small sound started. A distant door thumped once, then settled. The maintenance cart's loose chain whispered against metal. A bird, or something like a bird, tapped twice somewhere inside the roof. The CB hissed into life. Caleb hadn't touched it. He kept the squelch low at night, a private preference for near silence. Now a voice threaded through like a needle through cloth. "Think you missed it," the voice said, like someone speaking into a cup. Not angry. Not urgent. Just stating what it thought was obvious. Caleb glanced at the unit. The orange display said Channel 19, but no user ID ticked across. He hadn't keyed his mic. "Missed what?" he asked the air, knowing he shouldn't speak to a line that might have been open. His voice sounded like it belonged to the building, not to him. Static folded back. Then the voice, clearer. "Turned late. Happens." A pause. "You're late." He took a sip, set the cup on the bumper, and forced a small, normal laugh that went nowhere. "Late to a closed rest area?" Silence swallowed the small sound. The coffee's steam thinned and then stopped, though the cup still felt warm in his hand. He walked the length of the trailer. His footprints on the dusty pavement stayed sharp. As he rounded the front, he saw his reflection doubled on the building's glass. The dark truck, the man in a jacket, the glow of the trailer's side marker lights like a string of low stars. In the glass, the maintenance door in the far corner stood ajar just enough to show a seam of brighter light, though when he turned, the door itself was closed. He decided to leave. The sense that he was out of sequence tugged at him like someone pinching a fold in his sleeve. He climbed in, buckled, started the engine, and eased out toward the exit. The exit road fed into a circle, a yield sign, a right-hand bend. He took it, blinking at how new the reflectors were. He eased onto the ramp up, and drove. And drove. The ramp ran longer than it should have again, curving in the same slow way, and when it gave him a view of the lot below, his trailer's red marker lights looked back up at him from where he had been. He should have climbed out again onto the highway. Instead, the ramp put him back into the far end of the lot, between two painted trees that had never cast shade. He set the brake, more forcefully this time, and the hiss sounded like a sigh he found himself echoing. He shut down the engine and sat listening to the cooling tick of metal, and the faint, perpetual sea sound of traffic above that wasn't above. Inside, the maintenance door was ajar now, not just in reflection. The narrow hallway behind it smelled like wet concrete and old cardboard. A light strip buzzed like a cicada. The walls wore arrows painted in a hand that didn't know straight lines. "Service road," one arrow said, pointing down. "Exit to highway," another said, pointing up. Caleb hesitated. He did not want down. He went up. The stairwell turned twice and opened onto a door with a glass pane clouded by age or by breath. He pressed and it gave, and he found himself at the bottom of another ramp, this one narrower, flanked by a chain-link fence. Beyond the fence was nothing, flattened grass and shadow. He couldn't tell whether he was under the highway or beside it, whether the fence marked off someone else's space or his own. A cement pillar rose beyond the fence, holding up a section of road that ended short, like a shelf without a wall to attach to. He looked up for stars and saw only the underside of a surface that didn't reflect light. When he listened, he heard a bit of laughter, like people in a car with their windows cracked, rolling past on a place he couldn't see. He walked the fence, fingers trailing the cool diamond pattern, thinking he would find a gate. He found instead a post with a plaque that had peeled. "Do not enter. Authorized personnel only." Below it, carved into the concrete with something like a key, were initials, a date, 8/3, and then his company's call sign, the one painted on his cab. He hadn't worked for them in 2003. He had been finishing high school, watching trucks pass a town that felt smaller every year. His name was there too, or a version of it. Kale. As if whoever had carved it ran out of nerve. Or time. He backed away from the fence and the plaque, and the sense that the place had read ahead in his life. He went down instead, back into the maintenance hall, past the arrows painted by a hand that had not wanted to get anything quite right. The door to the outside opened as if held, and the night's air came in with the smell of cut grass that didn't exist here. His truck was where he left it. He thought about waking another driver, but there was no one to wake. The lot was empty in all directions, right to the edges where headlights should have curled in from the ramp and never did. He set his coffee on the dash, checked his mirrors, released the brake, and committed to leaving the way he had not been able to leave. If the ramp looped him again, he would stop on it. He would set triangles. He would force the geometry to accept him. This time, as he rose, he kept his left mirror locked on the edge of the lot until it fell away. The ramp bent and offered a view of dark fields. He drove at a crawl that would have angered anyone behind him, if anyone had been behind him. He spoke out loud, because voices help sometimes. "Up is up," he said. "Up is not a circle." The CB clicked, almost politely. "You're late," it said again, as if the voice had been waiting for its cue. The warmth in the cup by his knee left in a rush, and he saw his breath in a thin cloud that drifted toward the passenger side and disappeared, as if the truck had cracked somewhere and let the night in. He didn't answer the radio. He didn't touch the brakes. He took the ramp at 15, then 12, then 10. His hands were steady on the wheel. The top came into view. The guardrail. The triangle sign that promised merge in friendly letters. A brief shine of reflectors curling toward the left, and then into the dark. He nudged the truck forward. There was the shortest feeling of pushing through, like pushing a door that was not locked but reluctant. The line of the highway accepted him. He ramped his speed with a patience that felt like prayer. Cars existed again. He could see them, not just hear them. 2 taillights ahead. A steady presence. An oncoming pair of headlamps beyond the median. Flashing past like thought. He checked his mirrors and saw the lot far below, a small plate of light. Then in the mirror, where the lot should have dropped out of sight, he saw a rectangular shape snap off to the right, like a shutter closing. The yellow folding sign on the door clacked once, though he could not possibly have heard it from where he was, and then the rest area became a patch of dark. He drove until the horizon grayed, because that felt like the right amount of distance to put between himself and a place that called things by names they had no right to wear. Morning peeled off the top of the fields and widened the world. The air warmed. His coffee tasted like coffee again, and then like nothing at all. The CB stayed calm, behaving like a tool and not a mouth. At daylight, when the road had collected itself into a string of farm driveways and low bridges, he reached the mile number stamped into his log and looked for the rest area sign. There was no sign. Between mile 238 and mile 236, the number simply lost one and never admitted it. Where the ramp had been was a shallow slope of clay with rough grass, like a new haircut. Farther back from the shoulder, where a service road might have cut through, a line of posts with a sagging chain marked a kind of suggestion. No building sat among them. No maintenance cart threw a shadow. Only a flat slab of concrete lay squared to the world, half-eaten by weeds, with a series of small holes bored into it like a measure of music, each plugged with a puck of rusted metal. The slab was too small for a proper rest stop, too big for a picnic table. It looked like a memory that someone had tried to unbuild and had gotten halfway through. Caleb stopped at a diner that did eggs the way he liked and let his hands wrap lightly around a last cup of coffee he didn't really want. In the booth across, a couple 2 years older than he was shared pancakes, and the man told a story about a storm on a bridge, and the woman shook her head like she had heard it before and liked hearing it again. The waitress came by and looked at his trucker's jacket and asked where he'd come through. He said the state road with the long number. She nodded, and then tilted her head a little, the way a person does when they're about to choose whether to say something or not. "Gray Ridge," she said, trying the words on. "Heard that's back open." He waited, but she smiled like she'd made a joke she didn't want to explain and moved on. He watched the door, feeling the air out there as it pressed against the glass, making it shine. He thought of the plaque with the wrong date. He thought of the laughter that had not been the kind of laughter that cared he was under it. Later, when he checked the dashcam, the stretch where he had turned down to the rest area was sound and resolution and static. The speedo line showed a decrease. The timestamp was faithful, but the footage was a smear of grayness, like fog on glass. Near the end of that smear, one of the camera's mics caught a voice that tried to be a voice and failed. It was 6 syllables long. On loop, it didn't exactly say, "You're late." It said something that started with your, something that held its breath in the middle, something that ended with the hiss a human mouth makes when someone has closed a door to keep something else out. He drove nights because nights were kinder. He told himself that. On a different stretch, a month later, he thought he saw a small vertical rectangle appear in his passenger mirror, flick, and disappear, a sign swinging. When he looked directly, it was not there. He put a thin strip of electrical tape on the mirror's far right edge, so the corner that caught light like that could not catch it again. In the cab, in a pocket behind the seat, he kept the white paper cup with the ring around the middle for a long time. When he finally threw it away, it made no sound when it hit the bin, like a memory put down where it can't be reached easily anymore. Out on the prairie, there is no ridge to overlook. There is only the vast, polite flatness and the long-run sound of trucks moving through it. But sometimes in a certain weather, a mile goes missing, and if a driver turns toward it, the world makes space enough for a building that remembers a future and a voice that hasn't learned how to say the right word yet. Sometimes the night checks who is on time and who is not, and finds its own answer. Story number 2. Marisol liked the mountain routes because they asked for patience and rewarded it. Long grades, careful downshifts, the kind of steering that felt like holding a conversation with the road. Her refrigerated trailer hummed behind her, a dependable white comfort in the mirror. On the dashboard, a peppermint tin clicked against the rubber mat every time the pavement cracked in a certain rhythm. The night air thinned as she climbed, all pine and stone and the faint metallic scent of cold. They'd put in a new tunnel last year, a clean bite through the ridge with bright lights spaced like pearls. The old road, hand-cut into the mountainside in sections, had been left for locals and the nostalgic. Most nights, she stayed with the tunnel. Tonight, a construction board flashed. Lane closure ahead. Expect delays. Use alternate route. A smaller wooden sign, hand-painted with white letters, pointed up an older ramp. Old Summit Road. Her delivery window had wiggle room, but not enough to sit and idle in a line. She knew the grade. She'd driven it in daylight once to sightsee. The shelf sections were narrow, sure, but passable, with low rock walls and a few pullouts where the valley opened like a dark ocean. The idea of the old road at night felt almost appealing. Fewer brake lights. A sky that wasn't drilled by tunnel lamps. She put on her blinker and took the turn. The asphalt shifted to a grayer tone. Reflectors were older here, their amber eyes dulled. Tree roots had pushed under the shoulder in places, making small humps that her tires stepped over politely. Her GPS didn't love the choice. It nudged the display to show the tunnel path in bold, and her line as a pale thread that traced the side of the ridge with a caution a machine could not feel. The CB was mostly quiet. She kept it on for weather and cruise, more out of habit than hope. As she checked a mirror, a voice slid onto the channel, clear, clipped, using codes she'd heard only in stories from older drivers. Lead dog to convoy, down 2, hold 28, watch your lean at 17. Unit 5, you've got glow on your hubs. The tone carried discipline more than urgency. She glanced at her display. She wasn't on any convoy channel. The dial glowed on a number that matched her usual drive. She hadn't touched it since the last way station hours back. I copy, another voice returned, deeper, with a mountain drawl that moved like a truck does in low gear. Glow noted. Marisol reached for her mic without thinking. Break, she said. Because that was the way to introduce herself into a conversation she wasn't part of. Who's on 20? Static folded, then stepped aside. The first voice came through, unbothered. Convoy traffic. Keep it clean, she smiled despite herself. The voice sounded like a film clip, like a training tape found in a box that smelled of oil and cardboard. Copy, she said. Clean. She continued up. Pine trunks flanked the outer edge like listeners. The valley to her right felt too wide to be real. Stars were a scattering above, not many, the moon somewhere else tonight. The old road held its line tight against the rock, comfortable in its age. A metal sign, with bullet dents, offered a number in fading paint. 14. Pine shelf ahead, the radio said. Straps check. Marisol looked to her right as the name lodged in her ear. She didn't know the pullout ahead had a name, not one written on any map. But the little turnout with the low stone wall was exactly there, as if the voice had placed it. She eased by. In her mirror, she saw a shack she hadn't noticed before. small, with a porch light glowing the soft yellow of a filament bulb. On the wall, a thermometer with a red line stood still in the cold. She told herself it had probably always been there. A pair of red dots appeared up the grade, then another pair, then a third, as if she had caught the tail of a line. They were not bright modern LEDs. They were older, deeper, the kind that made a small halo around themselves. The dots hugged the outer side of the road and moved as one, like a ribbon. Her hand touched the headlight switch and thought better of dialing it to high. She didn't want to throw her brilliance into the backs of whoever was up there. She snugged into her lane, settled her speed, left a generous slice of room. "New one joining," a voice said, not unkind. "Cold trailer. Keep your pace. You sit at 7. Nobody rushes the lean." Marisol had not told them about her trailer. Cold air piped out the back and made its own small weather. Sure, visible in the mirror sometimes like breath. But she hadn't said it. She thought of the old road's reputation for carrying stories. Sometimes old routes kept their own records. She felt a calm slide over her like a sweater. "I'll sit at 7, she said. "Good," the voice replied, and something like approval softened its edges. "We'll pay you your mile at the bottom." The phrase meant nothing to her but sounded right, the way some sayings do even when you don't know where they come from. She left it alone. They moved. The convoy's rhythm settled immediately into her bones. Slow on the bends that pressed her mirror toward the rock, steady on the straights that were never truly straight. The red dots ahead. 3, 2, then a long curve where one pair vanished and then reappeared. Every now and then she saw a green marker on the shoulder. 13, then 12, then 11. They ticked down. The GPS protested quietly, trying to snap her icon back to the tunnel trace. It did not succeed. "Single lane cut coming," a third voice said, female, lighter, threaded with focus. "Mirrors in. Listen for the drip. Mirrors in." She reached and tucked her passenger side mirror arm a notch, then her own. The road narrowed to a slot chiseled through rock, wet in places, the ceiling low enough to make her want to duck. Somewhere within the cut, water tapped in steady points. The drip was like a metronome. She breathed with it, in, out, remembering an old trick a friend had taught her. Count your breaths, not the seconds. It calms both down the same way. When she cleared the cut, the road gave back a breath. On the inside wall, someone had painted numbers long ago. 10, 9, 8. They had blurred a little. Run with rain over winters. She glanced at her trip meter. It had slipped backward by 1/10, as if she had given time back to the climb. She shook her head once, laughed once, and left it alone. "You still with us, cold trailer?" the deeper voice asked gently. "I am," she said. "Good. Keep your eyes on the inside wall at the lean. Do not look at the lights below," the woman said. "They'll look like water. Don't look." Marisol kept her hands light. The steering spoke to her in small sentences. The grade leaned in a way the mind didn't like. The horizon didn't help. There was no horizon, only a wash of mountain and valley and stars like seeds. She knew what they meant. She had run a grade like this once in Wyoming at dusk, and felt the strange pull to look down at the river sunlight and not at the line she had to hold. Your body wanted wide. Your job was to trust narrow. A wind touched the trailer and let go. Her peppermint tin clicked once, and then decided it liked the left side of the dash, though gravity said the right was lower. She watched the inside wall, the paint scuffs from generations of cautious drivers, the arrow-shaped scrapes where someone had almost kissed rock and hadn't. The roads outside was a black that didn't reflect anything back. "Somebody's porch light, mid-8, the first voice said conversationally. "Wave if you like." A soft yellow glow floated in the trees across the valley like an ember. A house on a ridge. A dog barked somewhere, distant. Marisol did not wave. She kept her lane, a quiet guest in a conversation older than her rig. A turnout appeared, small, just enough space for one truck to pull in and breathe. The shack they'd passed was behind them now by a couple of miles. Another shack sat here, same size, same porch light. Its window held a square of orange, like a fire in a stove, a rectangle into which someone had placed a metal coffee pot that reflected her headlight's ghost. The radio said, "Pine Shelf 2, tighten your thoughts." and she did not know what that meant, but found herself doing it anyway, gathering her mind like rope, so it didn't drag in the dark, where it could catch on something. Sevens, how's your temp? The deep voice again. Her eye flicked to the trailer control. The digital readout glowed blue. It was steady. Holding at 34, she said. Sounds right, came back. The lead truck's red lights moved in a way she recognized. A brake tap not to slow but to mark a place. Old convoy trick. Warned the line where the road changed. She mirrored the motion. Just a feathering, not enough to wake the drums. Her truck responded like a living thing, sure-footed, confident. They rolled over a patch where the surface had shifted. The steering wheel went light for a heartbeat and then heavier, as if crossing a memory. Her radio hissed as if it had taken a breath between sentences. The woman's voice returned. Lean ahead. You've got stone posts without rope. Look in. Look in. Stone posts. She saw them. Squat. Old. Cut from granite. Spaced out along the outer edge where a guardrail might once have Saturday. No rope. Nothing between those posts but wind. She adjusted 1 degree inward and held. The mountainside around them, a sound made from fir needles and rock. Far below, she did not look something move that might have been the lights of the tunnel entrance. A necklace gift to the new road. She counted the scuffs on the inner wall. 1, 2, 3, 4, breathe. 1, 2. Her trip meter slipped backward by another tick. The road did not feel shorter or longer, only deliberate. The red dots ahead of her vanished around a bend, then returned. One of them flickered slightly, the way old bulbs do when a filament thinks about resting, and then decides against it. She thought, absurdly, about hands tightening tarp ropes and the smell of canvas after rain. She thought about the phrase, pay a mile, and how a mile could be a thing you gave, like a favor. They reached a plateau, not large, just a lessening in the grade, and the first voice called a roll as natural as a sigh. 1. Quote. 1. Here. 2. Here. 3. Here. And so it went. The voices layered with distance and time until he reached 7. It note. End of 2-3. Marisol paused. The number was hers. Here, she said, feeling like a student in a class that had started before she was born. 8, the voice called. Silence. The radio carried a breath of noise that could have been an answer if the mountain had bothered to shape it. Unit 9? The lead asked softly, polite to something not present. Again, silence, and then the deeper voice, the one she had begun to like, spoke in a tone that placed a hand on the shoulder, unseen. Cold trailer sits 7. She steps for 9. Copy, came the lead, with a gentleness that spread through the cab like heat from a vent. We carry them all the same. On the lean, we carry. We pay after. Marisol didn't understand it, but she didn't mind not understanding. The night didn't always tell you what it was doing. The mountain kept its reasons. They moved again. The trucks ahead, almost not trucks now, but suggestions of trucks, angles of shadow, red squares hovering at a height that spoke of older frames. Their paint colors were swallowed by the dark. She leaned into a curve and saw a tailboard ahead that had lettering in a font no company used anymore. The flourish of an ampersand done by a sign painter who knew his work would be seen by headlights at 3 in the morning and wanted to make something elegant that would be appreciated anyway. At a sign that said 2 with the paint mostly gone, the radio murmured, "Tunnels to your left below. Don't look." She didn't. Out of the corner of her eye, brightness drifted like a river. Her hands warmed on the wheel. The last grade rose like a shoulder and set itself down. Then the number appeared. 0. Mile 0. A mere marker, placed in concrete, white paint, on black. It had no right to feel like a destination, but it did. The turnout there was bigger, enough for 2 trucks wide to pause if they wanted. The red dots pulled in and hovered, idling without sound she could hear. She guided her rig into the side of the space, left room, set her brake, listened to the hiss settle into the air. For a moment, everything felt very still. The mountain watched, not with eyes, but with its own attention. The radio clicked. Roll paid. The lead said, "Cold trailer, you brought your space. We owe you 1 mile." Her trip meter jumped forward by 1/10. Then another. She blinked at it. Numbers usually only ever climbed. They did not leap. She said nothing. "Keep your door tight on the next wind," the woman added. "It'll test you. After that, you'll see the lantern. When you see the lantern, you're clear." "Copy," Marisol said. She didn't need to look over at her passenger side to know the glove compartment was shut. Still, she reached and pressed it. It latched more firmly. The peppermint tin lay on the left side of the dash, defying the slope, as if the night had decided for it. They rolled out of mile 0 one by one, pulled by a gravity all their own. When it was her turn, she clicked off her brake and eased forward. The wind that came for her came low, in a single long push like a palm against the trailer. The door seal hissed and held. The steering wheel asked quietly if she trusted it. She told it yes, without speech. A lantern swung ahead at a high cut, where the road pressed between 2 stone shoulders. The light was not electricity. It had that same soft filament glow as the porch lights. A pool of gold with edges like paper. It moved a little with the breeze. It didn't hang from anything she could see. She drove toward it, and under it, and out. When she reached the new highway, it was with a little jump, like stepping from carpet to tile. The tunnel entrance rose to her left, busy with cones and heavy equipment. A flagger waved a wand and didn't see her, or saw her and didn't register her origin. The GPS shrugged and accepted that she had found a way it didn't know how to name. On her right, a sign told her the summit's name in reflective green. She looked in the mirror. The old road's ramp paused behind her as a shadow where the mountain met itself. No red dots glowed there. The air smelled bracing and ordinary. She drove down in lower gear than she sometimes did, enjoying the control. The trailer's temp stayed steady, the hum, a good bass note. She checked her brakes at the first long straight and found them cooler than they had any reason to be. The peppermint tin slid gently back to the center of the dash and agreed to stay. At the first open turnout on the new road, she pulled in for a minute, just to breathe and to let the mountain out of her hands. She climbed down, boots on gravel, and looked up at the ridge she had just traversed. Nothing in particular gave away the old shelf, but the shape of it had that feeling of something purposeful built by human hands and weather-shaped afterward. A plaque sat by the guardrail, a small bronze rectangle with words that were easy to read even in low light. In winter of a past year, when the passes were unsure and the town beyond needed what only wheels could bring, a group of drivers made their runs through this section with a discipline that still hums in the stone. The mountain remembers those who keep the pace. Under that, names, no dates. A blank space the width of a palm sat at the bottom, unengraved, like a line waiting for something that was not a name. She put her fingers against it without thinking, and the metal felt very cold. When she drew her hand back, there was no fog from her breath, no print, just the bronze being itself. She found a coin near her left rear tire when she walked back. Not a coin you could spend. A pressed oval, the kind you make in machines at tourist stops, copper stretched with a design. On its face, a mile marker, 0, and on the back, lightly, the outline of a lantern. She turned it over between her fingers, studied the thin ridges from where the design had pressed, slipped it into the pocket inside her jacket where she kept a handful of small things that mattered for reasons she didn't tell anyone. Back on the interstate hours later, the world widened and flattened, and the radio returned to weather reports and jokes that strained. A driver she knew by handle only mentioned the shelf, like you mention a cousin who lives out past the last paved road. Someone else laughed and said the tunnel fixed that. Someone else said, not at night it didn't, and nobody argued. Days went by. Routines reset. On a clear afternoon weeks later, while passing a different ridge far away, she glanced at her trip meter and frowned. The numbers were ordinary, but in her head she kept a math that wasn't. She had paid a mile, and had been paid a mile, in a ledger that did not live in an app. When a new driver cut in front of her at an exit ramp, young and green and late for whatever late meant to him, she tapped her brakes just enough to give him space, and felt something in the world say fair. Sometimes on the mountain night since, her CB picks up a static like a sigh where the ridge rises out of the dark. The voices are rare. When they come, They are clipped and kind, and pay attention to the same things she does. The way a wind can push sideways, the way the drip in a cut tells you how the rock is breathing, the way a switchback feels safest when you look into it instead of across it. She doesn't look for the red dots. But sometimes she sees them anyway, as if the old road and the new have agreed where their edges touch. If she returns to the old ramp, she finds it gated in daylight, a chain across, and a sign that says, "Local access only" in paint that doesn't quite hide older paint beneath. On the chain, tied in a simple knot, a length of rope that feels like canvas used to feel when it got caught in someone's hands. She doesn't go past the chain. She has no reason to. She has already made that run, and the mountain knows her here, and is kind to those it knows. What the mountain keeps from the night stays with it. Tucked among the pines and stone markers and porch lights that glow for whoever needs them. Sometimes it asks for a space to be kept in a line, and a driver keeps it. Sometimes it pays a mile, which is to say, it lends you steadiness when you need it, and you hand it forward later when someone else does. That is not a rule written anywhere. It doesn't need to be. The hum of the road carries it. Story number 3. Nor preferred the river runs because they were neat and measured. The routes along the levees had a rhythm different from the interstate. Tall lights in clusters, broad yards with painted lanes like clean graph paper, the hiss of air brakes, and the hush of water moving somewhere just beyond the berm. Tonight's job was short on paper. Drop an empty at a distribution center by the port, hook a preloaded trailer, and be on the highway before the cranes woke. The weather app drew fog icons over the river delta. The fog there didn't hang, it moved, a low tide of cloud that slid across asphalt at shin height and made everything quieter. The gate kiosk at the distribution center blinked green in a slow, patient way. Noor rolled down the window and let the damp cold in. The scanner read the barcode from the dispatch sheet and fed a paper tag into a metal slot with a tidy chirp. The tag was crisp and smelled faintly of toner. In block letters, "Proceed to Dock 0. Dock 0. The lot map taped to the console in the cab showed docks 1 through 68 on the main wall. Even numbers on one side, odd on the other, with separate bays on the west wing for returns. No 0. Numbers didn't start at 0 in places like this, but the tag had a little arrow printed on it, a thick triangle pointing to a nowhere corner between the main rectangle and the offices. The yard was lit by masts that hummed on a frequency that made floor vibrations in the cab, not wholly unpleasant. The fog handled the light gently and poured it back in a soft spill that made the trailers look closer than they were. White trailers sat in straight lines, their corrugated sides catching the glow and turning it into pale stripes. Yard goats, little tractors with short frames, were asleep in a line near the fuel island, their hazard flashers dark, their ladders folded up like sleeping knees. Noor idled along the outer lane, reading the dock numbers to herself like she was counting coins. 12, 14, 16. The red-green lights over each dock, a set that told drivers whether to stay or go, mostly showed red, a gallery of tiny stop signs. Between Dock 2 and a metal door with a push bar sat a stretch of wall that did not carry any number at all. The paint there looked newer. A large rectangle of slightly different gray. A bolted-on weather seal framed what might have been an older roll-up, now skinned over. Noor slowed, put her hazards on, and studied the space the way a person looks at a word they know is spelled correctly but suddenly can't parse. The pass had a phone extension printed in small numbers at the bottom. She pressed it on her cell. A menu answered, and then a click, and then a voice that sounded like it came through a wall that wasn't quite on the same side of the building as hers. "Freight," it said. No greeting beyond function. Calm, monotone, tired in a friendly way. "Driver for pickup," she said. "Tag says Dock 0. The lot map doesn't note one." Pause. A rustle. Far away, the sound of a fan. "Copy," the voice said. "Dock 0 is open. Use the service lane to the south wall." The door with no striping. Back on the whisper. Chalk tight. No lights. Noor glanced toward the south wall. Service lane. Door with no striping. The phrase back on the whisper hung there like an object, that had always belonged to some other time. "No lights?" she repeated, keeping her tone neutral. "That's correct." The voice shifted a little closer to the mic, a small breath fuzz. "Dock light will come on when you're seated. No yard horns, no beeps, back on the whisper. The call ended without a goodbye. She set it down carefully, as if the connection were an object placed on the dash. She didn't love the idea of reversing in the fog without her backup alarm, but the yard was empty and her mirrors were clear. The service lane along the south wall looked narrower than the others, but still striped for trucks, its white lines faint and older. There was, as promised, a door with no striping, a rectangle of wall with a darker seal, a dock plate folded up inside, and no number above it, just a slow drip on the concrete where condensation had gathered and then let go. She lined up. The trick was to make the box do what the mind wanted, not what fear wanted. She set her window down, keyed off her backup alarms, and eased back on the throttle until the engine sounded thin to a low, even note. The fog pressed in. Her left mirror filled with wall. The right held darkness. She watched both at once, the way drivers do, with a hemispheric kind of attention. The trailer's white corner crept toward the seal. A dock light did not yet come on. Her brake ticked. The air set itself. The trailer's tires made a minute sound as they crossed from asphalt to a textured pad. The dock bumpers kissed the steel with a rubber hush. Something inside clunked secure, weight on bracket. A lamp above the door bloomed on, not the usual harsh fluorescent rectangle, but a warm round glow like a reading light. Her red-green dock indicator stayed dark. In the quiet, the sound of fans carried through the thin seam around the seal, not truly loud, but layered. Warehouse air moved differently in spaces that had been added to other spaces. Noor set her brake, slid out of the seat, and dropped to the ground. The concrete here was a fraction more polished than the new pods. Wheel chocks lay in a milk crate by the door. They weren't the modern plastic wedges with reflective stripes. They were heavy black rubber, stamped with a name in raised letters that had been on her grandfather's toolbox. She set them with her foot, and the weight felt satisfying. The dock light inside made a soft circle along the floor past the lip of the seal. No person stood in that circle. She waited for the dock's external go light to flip green and invite her to lower her landing gear. The light stayed out. A little brass bell somewhere inside chimed once, small, as if acknowledging her in a code she didn't know. She returned to the cab and watched her gauges as a habit does. The in-cab weight gauge, which read off her suspension, held steady at the empty mark and then ticked up by a tenth. Then, after a breath, it ticked down again, then up, as if the truck and the dock were testing each other's patience. When the first forklift moved, it did not complain. It approached without the high peeping of a modern alarm and without the electronic squeal of a badly maintained band brake. It came in like a thought and left like a breath, and the trailer trembled in a way that meant either realization or memory. Noor kept her hand on the edge of the seat and counted the movements, 1, 2, 3, because that was something to do. On the fourth, the in-cab gauge eased up by a whisper and stayed there. She sipped water, listened to her own engine idle, and looked at the little things, how the fog outside the hood's edge gathered in the low scallop where the metal met air, how the right mirror collected the yard mast's light into a single white pill and then let it drift down the frame as she shifted to breathe. She checked the time. It was always later in warehouses than outside them. The forklift came and came, and yet the gauge's needle behaved more like a metronome than a scale, marking time, not weight. After some uncountable but not unreasonable number of minutes, a slip of paper unfurled from a small printer, half hidden in a box by the dock monitor. Noor had not noticed the device. The paper carried a simple phrase, seal applied. Do not break until Sunday. Beneath that, the number of pallets, 42. The handwriting looked like it had been printed by a machine that had learned cursive. She climbed down again. At the back of the trailer, a seal band hung where there had not been one moments before. It wasn't the plastic strap with a number 1 wrote in a log. This was a cloth tie with a neat metal crimp, the kind used on sacks and sacks and sacks in photos of wheat in warehouses with high windows. It had a frayed end that looked new. She touched it with one finger, and the cloth felt cold, but not wet. She didn't break it. Dawn was far away yet, and the sheet had been very clear. She raised her landing gear, threw the chocks back in the crate with the respect you give objects older than you, and pulled away slow, expecting the dock light to go out. It did, but not all at once. It dimmed in a fade, as if a hand had turned a knob, and the dull rectangle of wall looked ordinary again. Out at the gate, The scanner blinked and the arm lifted without her holding out the pass. The guard in the little booth was reading a newspaper on a tablet. He glanced up, nodded without really seeing her, and let his eyes fall back to state things. The fog made the road softer than it already was. Noor checked her logs en route and merged toward the bridge. On the long steel truss over the inland channel, a crosswind set out to test welds. She had felt it before, a push that begins as a suggestion, then steadies and presses. Tonight it pressed, and she waited for the trailer to skitter a hair and then settle, the way empty or light trailers will do. It didn't. The rig held centerline as if gravity had widened slightly and put a hand on the whole length of her frame. The wind hit, and instead of translation, she felt a kind of low hum, like a piano string plucked very gently. The lane markings reflected back a little stronger in the mirror. The steering wheel in her hands felt not heavy, not light, but precisely appropriate to the turn. There was a moment halfway across the bridge where water below tends to catch headlights and throw them back up like bad information. Tonight the water went dark when her beams pointed down at it, as if they had been asked to keep their counsel. The hum from a distant foghorn rolled under the bridge, and she found herself exhaling in time with the sound, which is the kind of thing that sometimes feels like sync and sometimes like superstition. The trailer's temperature control, powered by its own small engine, lay still. The unit wasn't running, and yet a thin plume of breath curled in the mirror like winter air. She hit the interstate before the station turned its sign from rest to open. The way station's electronic signal flashed a bypass green at her windshield. She took it grateful, but curious. Her pre-pass had been inconsistent lately. Green tonight. Straight through. The rig that had held its line on the bridge now floated calm in the slow air of the early morning highway. No second guessing from crosswinds. No tug against patches where the road had been patched and repatched. Her mind waited for the small corrections that coastal roads ask from drivers. The corrections were less necessary than they had been yesterday. Near mile marker 143, fog pulled itself into a narrower scarf along the median, leaving the right lane clear. A pair of hazard flashers blinked on the shoulder half a mile ahead. She eased over, watched, and saw that the hazard was nothing but a service truck sleeping, cones stacked on its bumper, nobody needing anything. Passing, she noted the cone's reflective bands glowed a softer color than modern tape, a less brash silver, more like moonlight. She wondered who had decided to keep those older cones, and for what purpose. The service truck's door bore a logo whose letters were mostly rubbed off the paint by weather. All that remained was a curved line and the suggestion of a name. Her route turned inland toward a town with a name that belonged on postcards. The receiving yard there would open with the first coffee. It sat at the edge of low ground where a creek braided through cattails before slipping under. The lot wasn't modern, not like the port. The masts were shorter. The asphalt had a memory of summer heat in it, even in, say, March. A man at the guard shack wore a knit cap and typed slowly. He asked for her bill, and she handed him the paper that had printed itself in a room with a whisper. He read Doc 0 aloud and stopped halfway through the word. His brow lifted a fraction and then settled again. The way someone's does when they put a book down on the wrong page. Doc 0? He said. Not disbelief. Not surprise. More like a word he had been taught once and had not used in years. Back by the old wing? She didn't answer that. He worked for the receiver. He would tell her where he wanted her. Doc 3. He changed his mind with a nod. We'll break it there. We'll break it there. We'll break it there. The break meant unsealing and unloading. The clerk at the door, an older woman whose drawl carried tire iron humor and kindness both, glanced at the cloth tie and whistled under her breath so softly the whistle was barely air. Haven't seen one of those since the new fans, she said mostly to herself. She took a picture with her hand held. Mind if I keep the clip for training? Kids love a museum piece. She cut the cloth clean. The metal crimp parted with a tidy snap. Air moved out of the trailer toward her face in a way her body registered as weather rather than a draft. She took a small backward step no one commented on. The dock light in Noor's mirror didn't intensify the way modern sodium lamps do. It glowed round and courteously. The forklift that came for the pallets was the normal warehouse kind this time. Beep-beep backing with a rhythm that had been someone's law's idea of safe for years. The pallets were wrapped in clear film. Labels said nothing useful to a driver. item numbers. A line that said, handling, quiet. The clerk chuckled at that. That we can do, she said. The scale in the receiving office printed a ticket with numbers Noor glanced at and then set aside. The weight was lower than the count suggested. The forklift withdrew without complaint, and for a moment, while the line stood between loads, the warehouse had a stillness that made Noor think of the river when no breeze touched it at all. On a corkboard by the break room door hung a black and white photo behind glass. Men in jackets and hats stood by the original wing of the building, posed not like groundbreakers with shovels but like people who had just finished hauling something with their own backs. Behind them, the wall had 4 tall doors and a 5th narrower cut with stenciled numbers. The 4th door wore a big painted one. The 3rd said 2. The 2nd said 3. The 1st said 4. Between the 1st and the narrow cut, in small careful letters, was 0. A hand-painted sign above the narrow cut read, "Keep doors closed to hold line pressure." Noor looked at the river's direction, the way the yards sighed, and saw the old logic. How a building could be built around air, as if air were part of the inventory. She did not call anyone over to look at the photo. She did not need the scene explained. The clerk came back with the paperwork and handed it over with a pen that had the receiver's name on it and a line drawing of a heron. "How'd that gate treat you, with all the fog?" she asked. "Sociable." "Fine," Noor said. "Any trouble with the wind on the bridge?" the clerk asked, in the way someone might ask if a road has behaved like a road. "No," Noor said. "It held fine." The clerk gave a single nod that seemed to contain 2 thoughts, one old and one new, and then went back to her beeping forklift. She did not write Dock 0 on any line Noor could see. Out in the yard, Sun thought about a place on the horizon and then took it. The fog turned from flat gray to a layered thing, white on top, warmer near the ground. Noor hooked her empty and felt it sit behind the cab with a normal lightness she knew. As she rolled to the gate, she glanced at the slip from the port. The toner had smudged a little where moisture had got under the paper. All the words still read, except for the line that had said Dock 0. That area wore a grayness now, neither legible nor blank. The arrow still pointed to a corner of the lot that did not carry a number. Back on the highway, a convoy of morning commuters broke into clusters and then smoothed again. Noor rolled her window down for a minute to swap out air. The smell that came in had the river in it, and a faint trace of warehouse, a weave of cardboard and tape and motor windings and steel racks. If there was anything else braided through it, it had no name that would go on a bill. She let the air go, raised the glass, and let the cab return to what it always was. Drivers talk in small ways about docks that belong to hours and not to places. There are doors that roll up only when fog holds to a certain height, and doors that prefer a quiet engine more than any key code. Some places move bulk flour at midnight because the air is kind to it then. Some places load bales of fabric without music because rhythm confuses the labels. Very rarely, a door without a number takes a trailer and gives it back steadier than it went in, and the driver carries it over wind and water without trouble. Nobody waits for that door in daylight. Nobody photographs it. There are no jokes, and there is no bravado. It stays a piece of working knowledge you don't need to speak out loud. Weeks later, on a different run that crossed the city at a different hour, Noor idled at a light where a long wall wore a new coat of paint. A crew of 3 moved along, rollers on poles, music soft in a speaker clipped to a belt. At one end, where a much older seal had once been, the rollers paused. One of the crew held his roller in the air for a second, as if listening to something slightly lower than the paint line. He nodded to his partner, and they set the roller down again, and over the rectangle went clean gray. From her lane, Noor could see that the paint they laid down wasn't exactly the color of the rest of the wall. It was off by half a shade, like a word spelled almost right on purpose. She didn't watch long. The light went green. The lane opened. The truck moved with the ordinary grace of something meant for forward motion. On the river, a horn sounded once, then again, then fell quiet. A gull cut across low and went its way. The cranes at the port would take their first loads in the sun that made everything look less heavy than it was. Somewhere inside the bones of a building, a dock bell that nobody had wired into any panel chimed once just to check if anyone was listening. If they were, they didn't say so. They merely backed on the whisper and went where the arrows pointed. Story number 4. Ivy liked the desert runs because they talk straight. The land didn't hide what it was. You could read weather an hour away by the tone of the horizon, count distance by light, and know when the wind meant to test you by the way creosote breathed. Her route threaded 2 small towns, then crossed a dry lake bed on a causeway so level it felt like sailing. She carried palletized feed, light enough to behave, heavy enough to keep her planted. Late afternoon dropped gently into a darker color without much ceremony. The radio stations out here loosened and fell away until only a handful of AM voices held. Ivy turned the knob, catching a slice of a talk show about irrigation, a loop of steel guitar instrumentals, and a government traveler's info feed that repeated itself in a tidy cadence. She left the traveler's channel on. The voice was warm and unhurried, like someone who looked at a clock when they needed to and not otherwise. "You are listening to County Traveler's information," the voice said at intervals. "Expect reduced visibility eastbound at miles 69 to 70. 1. Use headlights. Slow to conditions. Do not stop in the travel lane. If you must stop, pull fully off. Turn off lights, including brake lights." It was the kind of advice they taught in classes and taped inside some restrooms out here. Dust shuts a world down differently than rain. You don't want to be the red glow someone's panic locks onto. Ivy nodded to the empty cab, thinking of the wall of tan she had seen once years ago, and the quiet white nothing she had seen once before that. Her GPS put the lake bed an hour ahead. The sky to the south stacked a little darker. Not dramatic, not yet a line, more like a deepening, as if someone had dipped a brush into thicker paint and dragged it very lightly along the horizon. At the last truck stop before the causeway, she topped off, grabbed a bottle of water and a small pack of ginger chews. The cashier in a baseball cap studied her rig as she pulled forward and came around, like someone who appreciated the way a person had kept a machine clean. "Wind warning's already up," he said. "You know the drill." "I do," she said. "Turn your lights off if you end up parked in it," he added. "People forget and then they don't." She nodded. "I remember. Back on the road, the information station's loop tightened. It named the same mile numbers twice in one cycle, then paused, as if waiting for something to catch up. When it resumed, the voice had acquired a new phrase she hadn't heard on these broadcasts before. "If you are on the causeway when visibility drops below 100 feet, it said, maintain lane position and proceed to the safe pull-off indicated by blue reflectors. Blue reflectors denote emergency lay-by. Pull fully in. Lights off. Stay in the cab. Await clearance tone." Ivy frowned lightly, counting lanes in her head. The causeway had 2 lanes each way, and a narrow shoulder edged by low pylons with amber cat's eyes. There weren't blue reflectors out there. Blue markers usually meant water taps in town or emergency vehicle spots. She had never seen them used on this route. She listened anyway, because even if the station was wrong, it was trying to help. She turned east toward the lake bed and climbed a shallow rise that usually offered a charming view of nothing. Tonight the horizon wore a long, low shade that reduced the distant hills to cutouts. In her side mirror, heat haze turned to a fine grain. The air ahead lightened in that odd way dust lightens, not brighter but paler, as if every surface in the world had been sanded down a little. Her phone chirped an alert. Dust storm warning, until 11:30 p.m. Visibility could drop to 0. Avoid travel. She looked at the empty hardpack shoulder, the miles between exits, and the way the wind had not yet fully committed. The safest thing would be to reach the pull-off at the far end of the causeway before the wall arrived. She kept a steady 60. No hurry in it, but no dawdle. Half a mile onto the causeway, the crosswind turned deliberate. It arrived like a present standing next to you, a sideways ask on the trailer that came low, then paused, then resumed a hair stronger. The lake bed, bone dry for seasons, had been combed by wind into delicate ripples. Ivy's tires murmured on the concrete joints. The railing to her left wore its usual string of reflectors, amber on the right shoulder, red on the left. She saw impossible. She thought at first, a dot of blue 6 pylons ahead. Then another. Then a third. Faint as a star. Low to the ground. A color that didn't belong in this palette. The information station spoke again, overlapping its own loop by a breath. "Blue line is active," it said. "Convoy speed 15, spacing 4 pylons. Do not pass a blue reflector on the left. She didn't know what convoy it meant. No one was ahead. No one was behind. But there, at the edge of her high beams, another tiny blue wink appeared, where a reflector had always been amber in her memory. And then the wind poured itself against the truck in a longer push, and the dust decided it liked the idea of being air for a while, and the world narrowed to a 50-foot tunnel that moved with her like a traveling room. She downshifted, brought herself to 20, and centered carefully. The blue points aligned in a line to the right shoulder. The first one flashed and held. The second lay dark. The third lit as she approached. It was not an LED. It was a small, old piece of glass bead, set into a reflector cap that happened to be blue. Where had they come from? She did not aim to answer. The wind drummed. The dust blurred the median to the quality of milk glass. She remembered the cashier's voice, "Turn lights off if you must stop." She left them on for now, because she hadn't stopped. But she clicked off her fogs. The world deepened by a tone, and that somehow made the blue points clearer. At the 2-mile mark, the wind stepped up, as if someone slid a rheostat. The lane lines vanished under powder-blown standing. The overhead lights, few, far apart, became faint pale discs with no visible masts beneath them. The radio softened its own loop, then lifted into live words. "Northbound feeder with the yellow strap at your ladder," it said quietly, as if not to disturb the dust. "You are third. Maintain 20. Blue right, red left. Lay-by in 1,000 feet. Ivy looked at her passenger mirror. A yellow tie-down strap did hang on the inside ladder to the catwalk, a habit she had of keeping one ready. Third? She checked again. Empty road. The phrase wasn't for her specifically, she told herself. It was something recorded a long time ago for a convoy that had fit that description, and yet the cadence of the voice made it feel present tense. A small sign shape loomed at the right. It had to be the lay-by they meant, a square of widened shoulder between pylons where service vehicles usually napped on calm nights. 4 blue reflectors on posts marked the back edge. Ivy signaled without thinking, then decided the signal was silly and turned it off. She pulled into the lay-by. The wind hit the trailer broadside in a long sigh, and then, as her tires found the slight rise of the pad, the push eased 2 notches, as if the air had accepted this choice. She set her brake. She turned off her lights. She lifted her foot from the brake so the red didn't glow. The sudden dark inside the cab felt kind. Once dark, her ears did the work, dust hissing along paint. The little seat creaks. A driver stops hearing after the first year. Far out in the muffled air, a horn like a moan, not a car horn. Something larger, maybe a locomotive many miles away. In the mirror, the blue reflectors drew a neat little bracket around the lay-by. She breathed like someone who had been talking for hours and was finally allowed to listen. The station's voice lowered. "Hold position. Do not exit the vehicle. Clearance tone will sound twice, then once." Ivy half smiled despite the situation. The formality had the calming effect of ritual. She texted dispatch a single line, holding at causeway lay-by for dust, and set the phone down. Nothing visible moved, except dust. The blue dots kept their counsel. Ivy felt the truck settle into its quiet posture. Time did the stretchy thing time does, when nothing happens and everything happens. She thought, as she often did, about the way certain places knew how to take care of people if people agreed to be taken care of. Out of the haze, a pair of red marker lights slid into the world and then held opposite her, not too close, in the next lay-by down. They were the old style, not the bright LED pinpoints she was used to seeing. They glowed with a cherry warmth, a small halo to them. No diesel idle reached her. No air dryer chuffed. She realized she had automatically tuned her hearing to pick those sounds up. And they weren't there. The shape that those little lights suggested, hood, cab, trailer, felt of another decade. Something longer in front, leaner along the sides. She didn't raise a hand. For once, not waving felt like respect. The information voice spoke without naming directions. "Hold," it said gently. "Hold. All units hold." Minutes expanded. Then somewhere to the south, the dust let go of one small fist. The wind dropped half a pitch, and the world around Ivy's lane changed tone. The station filled with a hum like piano wire, soft, almost musical. The clearance tone arrived exactly as promised. 2 chimes, far, like coins set carefully on a table, and then 1 chime, closer, like acknowledgement. "Resume," the station said, presence threaded with relief. "Blue line off. Proceed slow. Lights on." She brought her markers and headlights up 1 click at a time. The blue reflectors had gone amber again, if they had ever been blue. The lay-by ahead of her now held nothing at all. The red glow she had seen a moment ago wasn't there. She didn't linger on that thought. She eased out of the lay-by, checked that no one rode her shadow in the storm, and merged back. The dust still did its work, but without the pressing hand. 100 feet became 200. The line down the lane returned, a pale suggestion in a thin layer that the first rain would knit back to the lakebed. Halfway across, the world opened enough that Ivy could see the outline of the old way station that had been shuttered since before she ran this route. The canopy still stood, the signs papered over, the scale house squared to the road like a small palm pressed flat. For a second, just a second, the overhead open panel glowed the green of keyboard keys, then winked dark. She watched it in her passenger mirror, sure of what she'd seen in that blink, and also content to let it be a thing that had happened or hadn't in weather that changed the rules for a few minutes each year. At the far end of the causeway, beyond the lakebed's pale, the first hills reasserted their outlines. The wind tucked itself into the folds and made low sounds, more manageable, more like the world she knew. The traveler's station settled into its loop again, voice unspooling familiar advice at a measured pace. Ivy clicked to another channel, then clicked back, then left it. Habit sometimes wanted a witness. The small town on the other side had a diner that opened early enough to be called late. She pulled in, set her brake, and took a booth where she could see the line of parked tractors out front. Inside, a plant in the corner tried its best under fluorescent light. The coffee was the kind that had a life of its own, not excellent but honest. The server, a woman with a pen tucked in her hair, filled Ivy's cup and read her order off her face and got it right. "Dust get you?" the server asked, pouring another customer's decaf. "Almost," Ivy said. "Caught the worst of it on the causeway. Those blue reflectors helped." The server paused long enough to make the conversational version of raising an eyebrow. "Blue?" she said. "Emergency lay. Buys. Marked with blue." The traveler station called them out. The server nodded slowly. "Haven't heard the tiz in a while," she said. "County cut the budget for it last spring. They put out text now and say that covers it." She folded a napkin with a small, efficient motion. Out on the lake, though, well, people had a way. The old crews used to line the feeder road with those glass eyes from back when the army had a strip out there. Blue meant, follow me. Green meant, go on. Red meant, don't be foolish. Ivy smiled. "You have stories," the server shrugged one shoulder. "You drive at night, you collect them whether you mean to or not." Back at the truck, Ivy checked her dashcam. The footage from the causeway showed dust making itself larger than it had any right to be. The audio carried her engine, and a thin version of the information voice flattened by the cheap mic. When the clearance tones came, they sounded different on the recording, less like coins on wood, more like metal cooling in a quiet shop. The timestamp was steady. The GPS breadcrumb line traced exactly where she'd been. No record of laybys beyond the ones she could see now in daylight when they were empty of anything unusual. When she stepped down to knock dust from her steps before rolling again, something pale caught at a seam in the mud flap behind her steer tire. She freed it with a finger and thumb. A card, printed on stiff paper, the size of a postcard. On one side, a list of steps in simple block font. Dust procedure, pull fully off, lights off, radio to tiz, if available. Wait for clearance tone. On the other side, a small logo of the county's road department, an address Ivy knew had been renamed 2 years ago, and a line of call letters for a station she had never used. KAV 1610. She held it up to the light. The paper was unwrinkled, the ink unfaded, the edges clean. She set it in the pocket with her bills where it would get scraped and bent in a week and then probably disappear, like a lot of useful things do, making room for the next useful thing. Night routes make practical superstitions. Drivers keep particular coins, park facing certain ways, count the clicks between bridge joints, and tap the wheel at lucky numbers. Ivy didn't do most of that, but she tuned that station on her next pass across the lake bed just to see. The frequency was quietly occupied by a loop of jazz. Then, a station ID, in a crisp student voice from a college 50 miles away. The county advisory was elsewhere now, if anywhere. Weeks later, on a different desert road where the sage turned red at the base as if it blushed at cold, she watched dust raise itself along a far fence and then lay down again nicely. The wind played with her trailer, then left it alone. In the radio static between repeats of a joke on a talk channel, she heard a tone that might have been the echo of a chime and might have been truck sound. She looked ahead to where a service pull-off waited at the base of a gentle slope. The reflectors along its back edge were plain amber in the Sunday. She aimed for her lane and held it, and didn't look around for things meant to be seen only when the world is this exact shape and no other. If someone asks her about dust now, she tells them the common sense points, the ones on the posters. She might add that sometimes you're in a convoy without realizing it, guided by people who timed the wind before you did and set small signs for the night. She might also say there are places that still know how to help, if you agree to be helped. Short widenings where the air moves a little less, safety that hides itself until the world goes pale, a voice that keeps its tone even so yours can too. And if a person looks at her like they know what she means, no more talk needs to pass between them. The desert doesn't clutter itself with extra words. Story number 5. Damon liked the river country runs because they made sense. Fields squared themselves in orderly acres, farmhouses tucked back beneath cottonwoods, and the highway kept company with water that knew how to behave most months of the year. He'd leave the interstate, slide onto a 2-lane with a number that seemed more like a suggestion than a rule, and follow the line of the levee as if he were tracing a vein under skin. Tonight's load was straightforward, palletized dry goods, shrink-wrapped, stacked neat. Heavy enough to ride steady, not so heavy he'd worry about every expansion joint. Rain had fallen upstream, not dramatic at his end, but the river had opinions about distance. News had called it a crest. The weather app favored soft warnings, puddled icons, pale blue arrows. His dispatcher had said it would be fine by the time he crossed the Allen Bridge, a truss older than both of them but maintained and strong. He trusted steel that had seen decades, provided it rattled and hummed the way it was supposed to. Miles narrowed. The last town before the river lay asleep, its main street lit by 4 lamps that made little circles like islands. The bakery sign clicked a bit, not broken, just thinking about it. Damon fueled at the single island and watched a grain train roll far off, its lamps like commas. On his way out, he passed a reader board outside the volunteer fire station that had updated itself since afternoon. High water, in low areas. Use caution. A practical sentence. He folded it into his mind and kept going. The approach to the bridge ran through low ground. Ditches on either side of the road were full and moving. Not fast, not worrisome, just busy. The smell late in summer after rain has a particular weight out there, tilled earth darkening, cut grass giving up its sweetness, a touch of creosote where old timbers still held up old things. Damon turned down the radio, set the fan a notch higher, and watched for the sign that would tell him the truss was a quarter mile ahead. He saw orange first. Reflective sheeting picked up his low beams and returned it in clean stripes. Road work ahead, one board said. Workers present, said another. That wasn't unusual in flood season. Crews checked deck joints and approach slabs as a matter of course. He eased, dropped a gear, and watched the lane. Cones funneled the right side into a single line that felt polite, not urgent. A light tower cast a warm ellipse over the road, an older model, not the hard white LEDs that made night look surgical, but the metal halide kind that colored the air apricot and hummed faintly with its own idea of electricity. A flagger stepped into view at the neck down and held a paddle with slow facing him. The vest he wore was the older orange with silver bars, not the lime green Damon saw on most crews now. The hard hat had a band of reflective dots around it, a pattern he recognized from older photos. The man didn't wave, didn't make a show of it. He simply tilted the paddle and pointed, a motion that said, "You, now. Take the detour we've made." Damon rolled his window down an inch as he crept forward, waiting for the words people always used. "Watch the crown. Keep right. Your side coming. Take the cut to the levee road," the flagger said, voice even. "Follow the chevrons. No, Jake. Keep it settled. No, Jake. He clicked off the engine brake out of habit, even though he wasn't using it at this speed. Copy, he said without thinking about who he was addressing. The flagger's expression didn't ask for a reply. The paddle invited him on. Damon inched past the first barricade and saw the cut. The detour didn't run down to a county blacktop. It turned up, gently, onto the levee's crown. A service lane locals knew by truck, but city maps didn't bother to label. White posts laced the edge of the gravel with little reflectors that the light tower behind him warmed into warm lozenges. A line of chevron boards had been set along the outer curve where the levee pinched near a bend in the river. They were the older kind, the arrows painted on thick boards with a hand that knew what a brush could do. He'd seen that paint flake in museums and barns. Tonight, it was crisp. The gravel under him was new enough to feel springy, like it had been laid and rolled for this purpose in recent hours. He moved at a pace that would have offended anyone in a hurry, if anyone had been allowed in a hurry out here tonight. The trailer followed like it wanted to. No hesitation in the dolly. No side-to-side grudge. On his left, across the river's dark sheen, he could see faint squares of light where houses sat high. Some with their porch lamps on as if to keep the river company. Another crew stood at the top of the first rise. 2 people this time, one with a radio in hand, and the other with a stack of triangles. Their vests had the same older striping. One lifted a hand in a simple, unadorned acknowledgement of his existence, the kind of gesture that relies on work being the same night after night. The other set a triangle at the inside of a bend, not because he needed it at that moment, but because that's how you communicate the shape of a curve in fog and rain and habit. Northbound with the pallet load, the person with the radio said, not calling a handle, not asking for identity. The voice sounded like it came off the air rather than through it, as if some part of the levee itself transmitted particular words when they were required. Ease to center on the timber mat, left side soft. Damon looked ahead and saw the timber mat set across a small low spot where water had made a lazy attempt at being a channel. The mat was 3 layers of thick lumber bolted together, rough and practical. He centered the truck on it, felt the change in cadence under the tires, a steady thok-thok as weight stepped across planks, and then he was on gravel again. The river, as if appeased, let a frog speak once, and then keep quiet. Past the mat, the levee path widened, where a small equipment yard hugged the base of a cottonwood. Damon recognized the outline of an old section house, those small boxes that once held tools and nothing sentimental. This one had a tin sign half hidden by vines. He couldn't make out all of it, just Section 5, and a stenciled number whose paint had outlived the brush. A light burned in its little window, warm, steady, like a room that preferred being useful to being looked at. He checked his mirrors as he cleared the narrow part of the crown. The chevrons behind him winked once, in sequence, left to right, as if acknowledging the truck's exit from a measure of music. He told himself the wind had hit them in order. The river made a moving mirror below, smoothing the scene, and then roughing it up again without changing its meaning. At the end of the levee run, where the embankment met higher ground again, and the main road, cut past, another light tower stood, casting a circle on what had been a farm track longer ago than Damon could remember. Cones flanked it. A small sign on a stake read, "Detour ends" in block letters. He could see the 2-lane beyond, the Allen Bridge rising a 1/4 mile to the east, the way it always did, steel against sky. A third crew member stood by a paddle, slow visible. The person watched his approach with the same composed focus as the others, that quiet efficiency of hands accustomed to the feel of gloves and rain. "Bring it back to pavement," the paddle holder said as he rolled near, not raising voice, not performing. "When you get to the truss, stay left lane. Watch the gap." "You're fine. Watch the gap." Damon wanted to ask which gap, but the cadence of these exchanges carried its own logic. "You listen. You do." He eased down off the levee lane and onto the farm track, which wasn't muddy the way it had been could have been. Gravel had been laid where the tires needed it most. Someone had thought about axle weight and radius and made space accordingly. He merged onto the 2-lane without seeing any other traffic, which was its own kind of odd at that hour. Usually there was at least a pickup or two, a sedan with a single dome light on, a pair of headlights dragging a boat back to the yard. The world was taking a breath, that's all. He set himself for the truss. A barricade sat across the right lane at the approach, not a full closure. just a sawhorse with a panel and a light atop it that glowed steady instead of flashing. The left lane was clear, and a string of reflectors along the guardrail burned calmly like step lights. Damon read the steel without thinking. A truss tells you about itself if you look. Gusset plates, lacing, the cadence of its diagonals. The approach slab at the near end had always thumped his steer tires twice, a kind of greeting. Tonight the thump was softer, as if something had been packed under the slab to firm it until proper work could be done at daybreak. He put his wheels to the left lane as told, eased onto the steel, and listened. Trusses sing a bit if you pay attention. Vibration in pattern parts. The Allen Bridge gave him its usual song but tuned down half a note, like a choir keeping voices low out of courtesy for sleepers. Halfway across, he passed a light that had never been particularly faithful. It burned tonight with a steady tone. Far below, the river shouldered past pilings, muscular, patient. On the far side, the left lane fed back into the right around a neat set of cones that bent like reeds. The road beyond lay level and in its place, familiar in the way a good road becomes a person knows. Damon checked mirrors, settled his hands, and let the engine carry him down to repeat miles he had counted dozens of times. Whatever had been happening back there belonged to the people wearing vests and getting paid to make hard choices at midnight. At the receiver, a warehouse with a roof like a turned-over boat, the nightman took his bills and scanned them without comment. He had the tired posture of the willingly nocturnal. "River treating you decent?" he asked, like asking about a dog's mood. "Crew had a detour up by the truss," Damon said. "All very orderly." The nightman nodded as if he had expected to hear that. "They move fast when the bank decides it wants to explore," he said. "Good on 'em." An hour later, freight off and a signature scribbled in a box, Damon turned for the return. A breeze had picked up, patient, moving scent off water and mud across the lots. The sky had that bare band of pallor that sometimes promises fog even when none forms. He took the two-lane back toward the bridge. From a mile away he could see the light towers still making their warm bowls of light. He measured distance unconsciously, lined up his memory of the detour with what his headlights found, and touched the brakes as the pavement changed tone. Then he saw it. The right lane's approach slab wasn't just barricaded. It wasn't there. The asphalt ended in a clean edge a few feet short of the join to the bridge deck, and beyond that edge, air and the river's patient, unflashy power. No drama, just a gap where there had been none at dusk. Its edges geometric in a way nature doesn't usually manage without help. The left lane slab sat firm, kissed up to the bridge where it should. Cones drew a simple, graceful S that pulled traffic to that side. The barricade light glowed that steady, non-panicked glow. The detour sign still pointed to the levee service lane. A new sign now sat under one. Bridge closed right approach. 1 lane alt. The paint on the sign was crisp, but smeared at one corner like someone had made it available to air too soon. Damon's hands tightened a hair and then loosened. He took the left lane without being told. As the truss took him, he looked in his passenger mirror at the detour he had taken an hour ago, that arc up onto the levee and back down. In the mirror's curve, a figure stood by the first chevron, pale vest, hard hat, still. The person lifted the paddle very slightly so that the reflective face caught his light and sent it back. The letters he saw this time weren't slow. The paddle's face was blank. The reflectivity filled the circle as if to say, "You have seen the shape of a word. You don't need it printed." Back on the far side, at the spot where the levee lane returned him to blacktop, the crew was gone. The cones sat in neat stacks by the trunk of the cottonwood, straps buckled around their middles. The light tower's generator rested, its cable coiled. The section house window was dark, no little square of domestic light. Damon wondered at the timing. Perhaps they had buttoned up in the hour since he'd come through. The river didn't stop, but people did when they could. He kept or tried to keep his focus on the lane and nothing more. At the truck stop, coffee steamed, and someone laughed at a joke in the corner like they were trying not to wake a sleeper. A television above the coffee bar played the local channel's overnight crawl. A line at the bottom of the screen read, "East approach to Allen Bridge undermined. 1 lane open. Crews expect full closure by dawn. No injuries reported. Use posted detour." Damon stood there watching the words slide by. They repeated every 40 seconds. He poured coffee and let the words wash past again to be sure. They didn't change. On his way back to the cab, a little weight swung against his thigh. He looked down, thinking of his keys. His key ring had acquired a companion, a flat metal tag the size of a domino, with a round hole at the top, stamped with letters neat enough to be machine and rough enough to be hand. Dist 4. Night. On the reverse, a number. 117. The edges of the tag were smooth, like something that had sat in pockets and been handled while people waited for clearances and coffee to cool. He did not remember it on his keys before. He held it between finger and thumb and felt the press of the numbers on his skin. He asked at the register on his way out if anyone had lost a tag. The clerk, still in the baseball cap, looked at it like he was trying to place a face that had changed hair. "That's old," the clerk said. "Our county reorganized the road districts a few years back. Don't call them 4 and 6 anymore." He flipped the tag. "My uncle used to carry one for gate keys and equipment lockouts. Said you didn't lose one without a lecture." He smiled, eye corners narrowing. "You can drop it at the maintenance yard if you want. They get a kick out of that kind of thing." Damon put the tag on the dash and watched it catch a bit of morning as he rolled. When the maintenance yard opened full daylight, crows on the fence and a couple of pickups out front, he turned in and held the tag out to a woman at the counter. She wore a denim shirt with the department patch on it, her name stitched above the pocket. "Find this by the river?" she asked, friendly, touching the numbers with a fingernail. "Something like that," he said. "We don't use these anymore," she said, a little laugh under the words. "Everything's fobs now, but I like when they come home." She looked at him like she wanted to tell him something, then didn't. She lifted a lid on a small tin on the counter, and inside were tags like it, some dull with age, some bright. She settled this one among them, clicked the lid shut, and thanked him in that way people thank you for not throwing away something they care about. He drove out and merged back to the 2-lane. The river carried itself on as if it had always known this was the route. The truss stood like it had always stood, minus a lane's worth of approach. A new set of signs had gone up with official-looking stands, their legs scraped by gravel. The levee service lane had a chain across it now, a padlock at the center, shining with the particular brightness of new. No chevrons, no triangles. The section house window reflected sky. When he pulled the dashcam footage later for his own curiosity, the run up the levee showed as a simple track. Gravel, posts, chevrons in place. The microphone recorded only engine and tire, and a faint something that could have been a radio and could have been wind shaping itself on metal. He froze the frame on the section house and zoomed. The tin sign's paint looked newer through the compression artifacts, the letters clean and not. Section 5 showed clear. Under it, in smaller characters the eye wants to invent, a year, 1956, or maybe not. He let the footage go and closed the laptop. People who drive long nights learn to arrange information in 2 stacks. In one stack, there are things that are useful to say out loud. Slow and steady where the shoulder narrows. Don't ride brakes on the long downhill. Watch the crown when the rain tries to own you. In the other stack, there are things that you keep because they don't help to explain. A person holding a paddle at the edge of a warm circle of light who suggests you keep it settled. A route that opens for an hour to carry weight across an idea of water and then folds itself away again with no fuss. A small metal tag that does not belong in your keys and then does. He crossed the Allen Bridge many times after that. When crews replaced the approach slab, the work was crisp and noisy and bright, and filmed by a drone for the county's social feed. The new barricades wore proper flashers, the paddle signs were fresh, the vests were lime. The levee service lane became a locked line again, with a sign that said, "Authorized vehicles only." If he rolled past at certain hours, frogs laid their notes along the ditches like coins. If he rolled past at others, wind raked the water and said nothing at all. He never again saw the chevrons blink in sequence, or the section house lit with that steady domestic square. He didn't expect to. If someone asked him later what he thinks about detours, he might say the usual. Trust the folks who stand in the dark with signs and lights and tell you where not to put your wheels. He might add that some crews have been on duty longer than their paperwork suggests, and they carry a kind of knowledge you don't get from a handbook. He wouldn't claim more than that, because he didn't need to. Anyone who's driven a road that changes its mind in the night knows that sometimes the people in bright vests are exactly where you'd like them to be, even if they aren't exactly who you expect. Story number 6. Jonah took the northern contracts when the calendar turned slate and the lakes went still. The company liked him for those runs. He kept his paperwork tidy, never bullied a schedule, and talked to Winter like it was a colleague and not a dare. Out past the last town with a bakery and a hardware store that sold everything from screws to mittens, the road lifted onto muskeg and black spruce. The snow lay in ribbed drifts where wind and land had an old agreement. His trailer held boxed machine parts banded with blue straps, bound for a shop beyond the chain of lakes where engines were coaxed to behave in temperatures that made a breath feel like a thing you had to carry gently. The ice road this year was marked open on the bulletin. Conditions posted in the corner of the dispatch office in pencil and careful numerals. Speed 15 miles per hour. Spacing 500 meters. No stopping on the ice. The words looked small on paper and large when a person pictured a truck stitched by weight to a surface that used to be water and would be water again in a season. At the checkpoint, a shipping container painted orange had been turned into a small office with a potbelly stove inside and a coffee can of sand by the door. A loader sat idling, breath blue, a wide blade leaning into a drift like a shoulder. The woman on duty wore a parka with reflective tape, a hat under the hood, and a badge on her zipper with the name J. Bell. The mountains, low and old, looked like animals sleeping under sheets. "Route sound," she said, half to him, half to the form she filled. "Hold 15. Count your seconds if your eyes get lost. If you see a flag at a pressure ridge, take the cut. Do not stop on the ice for any reason. If you feel the truck wants to float, that's the flex wave under you. Keep your speed. Do not outrun your wave. Do not drop under it. You're good." Jonah glanced at the map tacked up beside the rules. The lakes were a string of white ellipses, the portages between them rough brush strokes of groomed snow through low timber. A pencil had marked pressure points like someone dotting a baking recipe. Ridge by the Narrows. Flood ice near West Bay. The ice road was never just one road. It was a conversation held anew each winter. He eased down the ramp that had been built up with snow and water and attention. The world under the truck changed tone. Asphalt's note was gone. Ice had its own throat, a low hum with higher harmonics, shy unless you listened. The marketer's word for that sound would have been something else. Out here, people just called it the song. His tires bit on the grit scattered in two light strips. His headlights found the markers. Spruce boughs stuck in the ice at intervals, brush ends pointing him true. Reflective tape wrapped around the higher branches made small silver bands that winked back. Overhead, stars gathered in the one place where lights didn't wash them out. Their cold did not reach inside the cab, but their presence did. He set his speed and let his right foot commit. 15. Not 13. Not 19. The number had the dignity of law. The idea of a wave moving through the water beneath the ice was one those who didn't run up here rarely understood. If you moved too fast, you outran your own smooth valley and ate your own bump. If you moved too slow, the wave lifted into your bumper and set the world to arguing. 15 was the promise people made to each other. On his left, a line of black hummocks marked where pressure had pushed slabs together and up. The ice wasn't fragile. It was strong and alive and made of rules that, when kept made, it accept things heavier than anyone should have the nerve to expect. In his mirrors, the white road stretched behind him like a ribbon laid on a table. His trailer's side marker lights glowed a slow, steady red. Jonah counted out seconds to test his pace. 1, 1 to 1,000, 2, 1 to 1,000, up to 10, and then back to 1. He didn't do that often. Tonight the numbers soothed. A faint light bobbed half a mile to the south, not on the road but off it. A shanty on the lake, someone's fish house, wore a lantern that colored the snow around it honey. He saw a shadow move near its door, and then sit very still, like someone thinking. He could not hear anything but his engine and the song. The ice had a way of taking sound and laying it flat, then letting it slide off the world's edge. Where the first portage reached shore, a small sign on a stake told him the distance to the next lake in a hand that had tried to be straight with mittens on. He set his steering to the cut in the trees, a hallway of packed snow with snowbanks as walls. The truck's body leaned a breath as the surface changed. Spruce wove a black lace above, a pattern planets might see if they looked down. A fox had trotted along the berm, and then left its decision to go another way in tidy prints. Jonah thought about the fox's quiet mind. and borrowed some of that calm. The second lake lay wider and flatter, and more open to wind. Ridges were marked cleanly with brush and blue cloth flags. A light blazed on the far shore. A truck at the turnout, maybe, or a cabin. As he rolled out again onto the ice, his radio hissed and then held its tongue. He had left the long range in a low volume, just to hear if the checkpoint wanted him. Static lived in winter like mice live in grain elevators present, busy with its own home life. He reached the first ridge. It rose into the world like a pushed carpet. Sunlight's memory caught in it from earlier. The cut around it was flagged with 3 saplings painted on the ends. He took it without thought, eyes on the lines the plow had cut and the sand had marked, trusting the width and trusting his own width. The sound of his tires changed note for a breath, lower, almost woody. Then they were on ice again, and the higher singing returned like a choir, the second the echo in a hall arrives to meet them. On the far side of the second lake, a stake wore a number painted on tin, 23. The numbers didn't count distance. They told crews where they were when they spoke to one another. 23 was usually where wind cut crosswise. Tonight the air lay still. Jonah watched the little ghost of his breath on the lower corner of the side window, and thought about closing the vent and didn't. He preferred the smell of clean cold to the candy sweet of his dash defroster. He caught something behind him then that made his eyes move to the upper middle of the mirror, a place he didn't always look. A pair of headlights had brought themselves quietly into the world, far back, small and with that slightly golden color older bulbs have. They sat at the horizon of the white and kept their distance like a well-mannered relative. No radio call came announcing a following unit. No voice asked his speed. The ice road required spacing. Perhaps the driver behind him knew the math as well as he did and didn't need to speak it out loud. At a narrow between 2 islands of scrub willow, the road swung subtly to avoid a heave. Jonah's left hand moved a hair, and the truck obeyed. His right foot reminded the engine of 15. He watched the bows drift past like metronomes for the eyes. The lights behind kept being there, neither nearer nor farther. If he glanced straight back for too long, they seemed to blink, not off and on like electronics, but as if something between them and him took a breath and then got out of the way. Out of habit, he glanced at his dash clock. The time held where it should. The temperature display lived in a range that told him the crew had made good ice. He glanced at his trip meter and paused. It had slipped back 1/10, and then thought better of it and returned to where it had been. He touched the glass with one gloved knuckle, and the numbers stayed loyal. It was a quirk, nothing more, the kind machines make when cold changes a tolerance by the width of a hair. The third lake was the biggest. Out here, named lakes with maps met lakes with names people used among themselves, names like Long and Big and Dog that got paired with numbers when clarity was required. Big 3 lay like a smooth table wherever the eye went. The crew had set reflectors low on wooden blocks, squares with tape that caught and threw back light in a way that made the road look like a slow river with thin white banks. Halfway across Big 3, the radio made a short, polite click, the kind you hear when someone tests a mic with a fingertip and doesn't speak. Jonah adjusted nothing. He breathed in and out. He thought of the woman at the checkpoint, and her badge, and her voice, and her rules that were promises, not orders. A shape stood up from the ice near marker 41. A little arch of metal, painted white, with a bell hung in its frame. He had seen those at far ends before. They were used to call crews when weather turned, or when a run needed to close. The bell had no rope. Some had a rubber mallet hung beside them. This one did not. Still, as his bumper drew abreast of it, the bell sang once. Not a loud peal, but a round note, like a bowl touched by a wooden spoon. The sound came from the metal, not from any hand, and it slid under the truck and was gone as if the wave under him had carried it along and let it back up into air at his rear axle. He could have told himself that metal contracts in cold and things move where they've been hooked to the world and sometimes sound results. He let the thought be there without insisting it answer anything. The headlights in his mirror didn't mind the bell. They continued their courtesy behind. Wind at the far end of Big 3 had worked the snow into a low drift that the blade had scolded and convinced into line. The marker was 45. The portage was close. The trees leaned to show him. He entered that dark hallway feeling for a second that his truck became a train for the length of 20 breaths, on a line someone else had laid, his cabin a lit bay moving through cut timber. The thought came and went. The road let him be what he was. When the last lake arrived, it introduced itself without ceremony. A small apron of white with a cluster of lights on the far shore, the shop's yard lamp, a porch, a wink of something in a window. The ice at the apron had darkened in a shape that looked like a fan. Crew had flooded it to thicken it. Fork marks stitched the surface where someone had tried and failed to keep their pallet from leaving their control one day, and then tried again and succeeded. History written faintly in scratches. Jonah kept 15 until the bow of the yard, a churned place sanded with grit and snow. He climbed the ramp, and the song under the truck ended, and a different voice the earth's took over. He pulled into the turnout and set his brake, and felt the truck sit like a patient animal that had finished a task. He climbed down with his hat on, and collar zipped. His boots made sound on packed snow that he could feel in his knees. The yard dog came around the corner in a sweater that looked like someone had made it kindness-sized and did a circle to decide whether to bark. It decided no. It walked up and pressed its head politely against his leg, and then went away to supervise something else that didn't need supervision. Inside the shop, warmth sat at shoulder height. The clerk at the counter checked his paperwork with fingers that had lost a glove once, and didn't dwell on it. "Road treat you decent?" he asked. The way men and women up here ask the weather to confirm it has kept its side of a bargain. "It did," Jonah said. "Bell at 40, one sang me through. Crew's got a tune going." The clerk smiled with just his eyes. "Old station bell," he said. "Goes off when a person needs to keep to the number. You kept to it, I expect, seeing as you're here." There was nothing to argue in that. Jonah nodded. He signed where he had to. Somewhere in the building a machine clicked and thought about starting and then did, the strong hum of electricity letting itself be shaped. He glanced out the office window while they printed the receiving slip. The yard lamp sent a gentle cone out over the apron, and beyond that, the ice road ran off to the horizon, as if someone had drawn a white line in the night to chart a distance between warm spaces. The headlights that had followed him across Big 3 were not in sight now. A pickup rattled by with a bed full of stove wood. A kid in a hat nearly too big for him walked with deliberate care across the hard pack, a crate of something in his arms, using the soles of his boots like careful arguments. On the way back to the checkpoint, he fell in behind a grader smoothing a bleed of flood ice with a wide blade that bought everyone a little mercy. He took his spacing on the lakes and didn't think about the bell. He didn't need ceremony to go back the way he had come. The lights he had seen earlier appeared once at a distance and then weren't there. He didn't look for them more than that. By the time he rolled off the last ramp and onto pavements indifferent gray, dawn had put a weak wash over the spruce. The checkpoint office's stovepipe trembled a line of smoke into the air. The woman with the badge marked his return on a clipboard. "Good run," she said, looking up and then past him as if watching the road remember another set of tracks. "Hold to your 15 like that, and the ice will treat you like a guest." "It did," Jonah said. She reached into the pocket of her parka and set a small strip of reflective tape on the counter, no bigger than a thumbnail. "Fell off one of the bow markers," she said. "If you're going to be on the lakes this week, tie this on somewhere in your cab. It catches light, you don't always notice. Helps at night. People have their ways." He took the tape because refusing would have felt like refusing an umbrella offered in a rain. It was not much. A little rectangle with adhesive dull, where gloves had touched it. A scissored edge. He stuck it on the little folding ruler he kept in the pocket on the dash where shopping lists and toll slips go. The tape reflected his cabin light in a way that made the ruler look like it had a tiny moon stuck to it. A month later, back down near places where winter meant slush and metal roofs went ping-ping in sun, he listened to a driver tell someone at a counter that the ice roads were different now, all plowed and posted and sterile, no romance to them. Jonah didn't offer his opinion. He thought about the sound the bell had made without help. He thought about a truck's speed and a wave he couldn't see, and the way the numbers on his dash had done a small dance and then decided not to behave oddly after all. He thought about headlights that stayed at a respectful distance and made no sound. He kept those thoughts the way a person keeps delicate tools, wrapped, ready, not for show. He crossed one of the lakes again at night before the season closed. The Aurora lay a thin green river low over the trees, more suggestion than display. Somewhere, far beyond the brush markers, someone tapped metal with something that was not a mallet and made a tone that could have been a bell and could have been ice being its own kind of musical. He counted to 10, and then to 10 again, and let the number be its comfort. And saw, out of the corner of his mirror, a golden pair of eyes at the horizon that did not ask anything of him and did not require anything but space. At the far shore, snow squeaked under his tires and the song let him go, and the ground's voice picked him up. He didn't go looking for explanations in the pattern of spruce or in the pencil notes on the office map. He kept the tape on his ruler. It caught light on cloudy days, a small brightness that seemed to angle itself toward his eye when he forgot it was there. If someone asked him about ice roads, he told them the truth. They are made of math and water and trust. He might say there are bells out there that are not hung on ropes but on the part of the world that notices when a person does what they said they would do. He might add that if you drive 15 when the sign says 15, the lake will let you past with a song under your wheels, and the feeling that the road becomes what it needs to be when you treat it like a living thing. Story number 7. Rhea ran the high plateau routes because they were honest about the wind. No trees to lie, no buildings to make rude countercurrents, just air moving as it pleased over rolling grass and the long spines of basalt. Her trailer tonight held spools of heavy insulated cable, strapped with care, bound for a substation 2 counties over where a crew would pull the lines into conduit before dawn. The dispatch note had a polite underline. Deliver by 3:30 a.m. Construction closure on main line. Signed detour via county road network. She had the letter authorizing the detour folded in the visor. The kind of paper you show through glass at a checkpoint where everyone is cold and nobody wants a debate. She left the interstate at a diamond interchange, where a diner's neon flickered red in a way that made it feel like a cigarette tip. The county road rose without drama, and then kept rising, the world opening in a plain so level you could see the turn of the earth if you let your mind. Far ahead, as if someone had set a constellation down on the ground, a field of wind turbines blinked red in synchronous pulses. Hundreds. Maybe. The lights strobed together every few seconds. On, off, a soft beat against the dark. Rhea had seen them by day, white towers, long blades, nacelles that looked like quiet animals facing the breeze. By night, they became a grid of steady tempers. The effect was not menacing. It was deliberate, like a metronome someone had set to keep a pulse. At mile 12 on her odometer since leaving the interstate, a portable message board glowed amber. Construction all traffic use Skyline, detour follow county signs. Behind it, a pickup with a rotating beacon idled in a turnout, no driver visible. The arrow on the board pointed right, toward a service road that paralleled the highway just beyond a fence line. A second sign, not modern, not old, read, "Authorized vehicles only." The authorization letter in her visor seemed to weigh more for a second. She eased off, signaled even though no one followed, and took the turn. The access lane was wide, graveled, and well kept. A cattle guard took her wheels with a polite thrum. Stout gates stood open and chained back. A small placard on the first gate post listed a phone number for operations and a 3-digit code for emergencies. The code was the same as the last 3 of the detour letter's permit number. Rhea noted the symmetry and kept moving. Signs on posts marked the grid in a language that was almost familiar. T, 13, N6, SVC2. Each tower had a number stenciled at its base in big, forgiving characters, easy to read with headlights low. The turbines up close made their own weather. Even when the wind was light, you could feel the air re-angled by a blade 10 stories above, the whisper of something as wide as a wing turning the night. The red obstruction lights on each nacelle flashed together, a slow heartbeat over the whole field. The strobe made the racks of sage look momentarily like still frames in a film, lit, then returning to dark, with the impression of their outlines lingering in the eye. Her radio, kept on the usual highway channel out of habit, did a small thing. It clicked and then held voice, not CB, not FM, but a kind of open intercom tone that made her think of plant rooms and supervisors with clipboards. Skyline Convoy, the voice said. Easy, practical, the way a person speaks when they concentrate on the important parts. Southbound to substation, hold 18 on the flats. Shadow flicker expected at nacelle 17. Do not stop under yaw. Pace on my call. Rhea reached for the mic and then didn't. She had not switched to any local frequency. Nobody had asked for her handle or plate. The letter didn't mention an escort. She looked ahead. The road ran straight between twin rows of towers, To the right, a substation sat like a silver geometry against a low-ridge buswork. Breakers, the faint glow of a yard light. She thought, maybe this is how they run this detour. Maybe the voice goes to anyone with a radio. She let the truck hum. Copy, she said anyway, because it felt polite to acknowledge a tone that had just offered to help. Southbound with cable, holding 18. Good, the voice said, as if it were normal to be answered by someone it already knew existed. Mark your turns by tower base plates. Right at T12, left at N5. You'll see the numbers. Stay off shoulders. Soil's soft from last rain. Ice throw advisories off. You're clean. Rhea read the bases as instructed. T14 came and went. T13. The road bent a hair to run between towers. She didn't need high beams. The field's red beat and her low headlights painted enough of a world. The towers seemed closer together than they had from the highway, and there was a curious contradiction to their motion. In the moments of red glow, the blades appeared to pause in the strobe. In the dark between, her eye resumed watching their true rotation. That on-off trick, a magician's tiny whisper of a lie, produced the feeling that they turned forward, and then backward, and then made up their mind again. She kept her attention on her lane and her speed and on the base numbers, letting the big shapes be big shapes without insisting they explain themselves. At T12 she signaled, out of habit that had nothing to do with other drivers and everything to do with keeping her own hands occupied the way they like to be occupied. The right turn brought her closer to the towers than she had been. She could see the anchor bolts and the painted manufacturer tags and the polite warnings about high voltage and blade throw and the simple drawing of a phone with a number to call if you hit something that spattered oil. No oil spattered. Everything was very clean. The radio breathed again. Shadow ahead, the voice said. It will look like water. It will look like a strobe made out of night. Keep 18. You'll want to ease under 20. Do not. She almost laughed. A courteous exhale. The voice was right. As she came alongside Nacelle 17, where a service road crossed under a tower's sweep, the strobing red lights from the nacelles, high and synchronized, coupled with the blade's movement and the angle of her truck's approach, produced a wash of shadow on the ground that came toward her like waves. It wasn't dangerous. It was only light and darkness doing the old trick of making themselves into something a body recognized as motion. But the brain has old lanes. In those lanes, a pattern moving toward you is a thing you brace against or a thing you move toward. She held 18, not 19, not 16, eyes steady on her lane's edge, letting the wash pass over the truck like shallow surf lifts a boat and sets it back down. The cable spools in the trailer stayed quiet. Nice hold, the voice said. And for a second, Rhea felt the odd, gentle warmth of praise from someone whose job it was to notice when people followed simple rules, as if simple rules were the point. After N5, the left at the signpost, she moved into a section where the towers stood closer together, climbing a shallow saddle. The wind freshened. The blades yawed to face it with a sound like weather imagining a hinge. Somewhere far in the field, a crow made its night sound, which is like a piece of black fabric being folded once. Pause at anchor pad 9, the voice said. You'll see it, crosshatched concrete, paint worn off center. Hold 60 seconds, then I'll roll you. Anchor pad 9 arrived at the crest of the gentle saddle, a square of textured concrete between service lanes, a place for heavy equipment to sit when they do lifts. The crosshatch was scuffed by treads and feet in time. Rhea brought the truck to an even early brake and let it settle. Transmission in neutral, foot off the pedal so no brake lamps glowed. The turbines around her flashed their red, off, red, off. In the periods of dark, a fullness of stars hung so close, it felt like the truck's cab roof went transparent. In the periods of red, the world became a room with a ceiling that pulsed. She checked the clock reflexively. 2:27 a.m. The voice had asked for 60 seconds. She counted them, low in her head. The way you count as a kid, learning to hold your breath in a pool. At 40, a different sound came, a low harmonic from the substation ahead, not loud. A change in the chord as if a switch connected or a bank took load. The radio clicked. Proceed, the voice said, smooth, as if giving a reading to a class, patient with the idea that words sometimes need to be set gently in front of a person. Return to 18. Right at SVC 2. Then lane 1. No stopping on the apron. You'll see a ground man. He will not speak. He will point. Rhea rolled off the pad. The truck received the change in grade and went back to its read. SVC2, another service turn, brought her around a fenced yard where a little building with a metal door hummed quietly to itself. The apron beyond was poured concrete striped with shadow. She could see the substation's outer gate open, and a person in a hard hat standing just inside, hands in pockets against the cold. The person lifted one arm, pointed to the far end of the lane, the most natural motion in the world, like telling a friend which counter has your coffee at a crowded diner. The point did not change. No flashlight, no phrasings over the radio, just the unmistakable grammar of a gesture. Rhea kept her speed and made the lane without touching her brakes, because some places prefer not to be announced to with light. The apron's smoothness felt like a kindness to a heavy load. The person with the hard hat lowered their hand once she was committed to the line, then took 3 steps backward into the pool of light near the door, and simply was a person, existing as if that were all a guide needs to do. She drew past at a width that would have embarrassed her if she had misjudged it. She did not misjudge it. Inside the substation yard, the cable's receiving base sat where the plan had promised it would. She set the truck in position and waited for a wave before she killed her engine. The groundman at the bay wore a different jacket than the person at the gate, and a different hat. He tapped a knuckle on the rail to get the attention of a second worker who rolled a cart. Nobody shouted. It was a quiet kind of work. The receiving guy climbed the bay ladder and nodded approval at the straps, at the way the spools had been chalked with wedges someone had cut square. He signed her papers with a stubby pencil and a name that would read differently in daylight. "Plenty," he said when she asked if they had enough hands. "Get turned and go," he added in a tone that combined looking out for her sleep with looking out for something she hadn't been told about explicitly. On her way out, the person at the gate gave the same small, unobtrusive point, this time toward the far lane. Rhea eased to it. The radio spoke once more. "Northbound return. Hold 19 until the pad. Then you can take what you like. Watch shadow. Stay off shoulders. Good work." "Thank you," she said, and meant it. She did not say to whom. She didn't need to. She took her lane back into the field, climbing through the towers again. She felt the wind change direction a little. The turbines responded in a series of polite yaw adjustments, each nacelle turning a degree, then another, a chorus of mechanical meaning adjusting to natural meaning. At anchor pad 9, she did as told. Rolled to a smooth stop, breathed a minute. Watched the red lights pulse like the blink of 1,000 patient eyes. On the far ridge, a small herd of pronghorn lifted their heads all together and then decided she was not interesting and lowered them again. She rolled on. Past N5 and T12, darkness began to lift in the east by a color that did not yet count as morning. The grid's blinking made the first pale blue feel like a separate layer. At the last tower row before the fence, the road met up with the county lane again. The portable message board that had glowed amber on her way in was dark now, its arrow off. The pickup that had idled in the turnout stood in the same place, with its beacon unlit. She looked for a driver and saw only the shape of someone sleeping, or no one at all. The field of turbines pulsed red behind her, not for her or because of her, but in their own rhythm, which they would keep whether anyone watched or not. On the county road, a sedan passed going the other way at the speed of someone late to a shift. Its taillights painted the world a modest red and then left. Rhea shifted into the long fall down to the main highway, checked her mirrors with the satisfaction of a road that has offered no surprises except the good kind, and felt the simple relief of a plan that had been kept. At the substation's office later that afternoon, when the night gave itself back to daytime, she asked the clerk who had signed her papers if they had a radio channel for detour escorts, just because there's no harm in complimenting a system that worked. He shook his head, polite but blank. "We don't run escorts," he said. "County usually sets a flagger when they close the main line. We don't have the staff. You came in just ahead of the closure. They shut the lane for a sink near mile marker 203 right after you rolled. Glad you made it." The voice on the radio, she said. "Operations. Someone called me by route. Told me to hold at a pad." He smiled in the way people smile when they don't want to disabuse you of a good story but also don't know how to be kind and accurate at the same time. "At night in the field," he said, "you'll catch the scatter squawk sometimes. The control system sends little tests up the lines, and folks' radios pick them up if they're tuned just wrong. Sounds like someone giving orders. We joke about it. Nobody trusts the joke. She nodded. It was a reasonable thing to say. She didn't feel argued with. He handed her a receipt with stamps where stamps belonged and a line in pen that said, "Received in good order," which is a sentence she liked for reasons that had nothing to do with romance. Back in the cab, she found something she hadn't put there. On the little ledge by her passenger door, where dust collects and pens go to become lost and found, lay a small diamond of pale plastic hung on a bit of twisted wire. It was the size of a nickel, with a pattern of ridges that made it catch light just so. On it, debossed, the letters FF and a number. 17. She recognized it from a picture she had seen in a trade journal bird diverter tags, the little reflective spinner's crews clip on guy wires and static lines, so wings see what they otherwise might not at speed. This one had no spin left, just the tag, the wire bent, where pliers had once twisted it onto a cable. She didn't assume it had anything to do with anything. The world sheds hardware. Trucks offer rides to objects without asking. Still, she turned it between fingers and felt the ridges and thought about Nacelle 17 and the shadow that had moved like water and a voice that took the edge off of something by naming it. She hung the tag on her dash by the small clip where a parking pass lives sometimes. When red light from a radio tower caught it on later nights, it made its own delicate signal, not bright, only enough to say, "Remember." Weeks later, rolling a different plateau under a sky that had decided on snow and then changed its mind to fog, she watched another field of turbines at the edge of nowhere flash and sink. Sometimes she would see fields where the lights were out of time, one going while another was in its off. Tonight they beat together. An orchestra instead of a lot of solos. In the space between the pulses, the land felt bigger and softer. In the pulse, it felt precise. On the radio, a weather report called for wind out of 2 directions and smiled about it. She lowered the volume and let the engine write a long sentence of the road. If someone were to ask her later what it had been like weaving through a field of giant quiet machines in the middle of a night, she might say it was like being allowed to walk through the backstage of a theater where the stagehands have arranged everything so smoothly, you forget they are there. She might say voices exist that don't belong to people, and sometimes they help if you listen, and sometimes they are only the way we describe the feeling of being on the right path at the right speed. She would not insist. She would point at a map and a permit and the timestamp on a bill of lading and say, "This is the work," and the work was done. Once, idling at a red light down in a town that wanted to be a city, she saw a maintenance truck from the wind company ease by with a ladder rack and a little amber beacon flickering. The sticker on its door said Skyline. The driver yawned like a person and turned onto a side street. Rhea watched the beacon until it was lost behind brick. Her radio, quiet, did not click. The little bird diverter tag shifted on its wire and made a single soft sound when the truck caught a shallow pothole and kept going. As the final story drifts into silence, remember some highways never truly sleep. The echoes of what we've heard tonight still roll through the dark, carried by the wind and the hum of engines far away. Out there, somewhere, another driver is about to learn what waits beyond the headlights. If you've made it this far, you're braver than most. Don't forget to like this video, share your own eerie road story in the comments, and subscribe to the Sleep Haunt where the night never ends and every mile has a memory. Sleep well, if you can.